Okay, we will start the webinar in about 1 minute just to give people a chance to log on. So we will be starting shortly. Don't worry.
Giving people 1 minute to join here at the top of the hour, and we will get started right away with our opportunity of cost of DIY Java webinar. All right, I think we're going to get rolling. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending. This is the first webinar in a three-part series on the true cost of free Java runtimes. Today, we'll be focusing on the opportunity cost of do-it-yourself Java. And see if I can get this going. I am Dana Crane. I'm one of the product marketing directors here at Azul, and I am joined today by Simon Ritter, our deputy CTO and Java champion. Say hello, Simon.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are.
Great. Let's get through the housekeeping first. So we will be making a recording available of this video. It'll be sent out to all registrants, whether they attend or not. And we want you guys to enter your questions into our Q&A panel. You'll find that at the bottom of the screen. Anytime you have a question, just pop it in there. We will have time at the end to answer all the questions. So our agenda today looks like this. We'll be talking a little bit about some of the Oracle Java problems that Oracle customers might be facing.
So I'm just going to interrupt. I don't think anybody can see the slides at the moment. Are you sharing the slides?
Yeah.
Ah, yes,
Oh,
there we go.
excuse me. Apologies for that.
That's
We'll
okay.
get
I wasn't
going
sure if
on
it was
first thing
the
on a Monday morning. All
good.
right.
Yes, we can now see the slides. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, now you know what we look like. The housekeeping slide I went through already, but I want to talk a little bit about the agenda. So when we talk about the Oracle Java problem, really we're talking about many different facets. And these are the things that we typically encounter when we talk to customers, talk to prospects, especially if they have a contract renewal coming up this year. And all of the opportunity costs associated with those Java problems, that's what we want to get through today. And we want to understand whether it's possible to avoid those costs. One of the ways that you can do that is through upgrading your way out of that, or maybe even resorting to self-support. So we'll talk a little bit about the trade-offs, the pros and cons associated with each of those approaches. And then we'll compare the opportunity cost of those initiatives against what Azul offers as well. So when it comes to these kinds of problems that we hear from customers and prospects, especially if you've got a contract coming due this year, you might be trying to understand what the impact is. And it can be kind of confusing. We've seen Oracle change their license model 4 times over 4 different years, and that's caused a lot of uncertainty, especially with the management types. They're really uncertain about A, are they continuing to be compliant? And B, what is the actual cost they're going to be hit with this year? Because that has a huge impact on budgets. And if you've got a large Java estate with multiple versions of Java in place, which is most of the enterprises that we talk to, that means you're going to have to track multiple different kinds of licenses because that license model keeps changing. So if you've got older installations prior to Java 8, you may not even be on support. If you've got Java 8 prior to update 201 or 202, that means you've got a free version, and that's similar to the most recent version, Java 21, which has the no fees, terms, and conditions license applied to it. But there are other licenses as well. If you've got Java 11 and Java 17, you're probably on the Oracle Technology Network license, and that's a paid for license. So the fact that there are multiple different licenses to track, multiple ways for Oracle to come at you for licensing costs, That causes a lot of issues, a lot of complexity in the network, especially for those that have to track it. And we'll talk about that more on the next slide. But one of the most concerning things is the most recent version of the license metric, which is the Java employee license metric that Oracle rolled out in January of 2023. And that's because it's a brand new way of evaluating Java. It takes into consideration your employee headcount rather than your Java deployments. And that can be extremely expensive depending on how many employees you have in your organization and how Oracle defines what an employee is. I'll talk about that a little more on the next slide as well. And then finally, as your Java estates age, a lot of the implementations that you currently have are no longer supported. And that can mean a lot of issues arise around security and making sure those things are actually functional within the organization without causing a lot of security headaches for your security people. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we recently did a survey amongst IT asset managers globally, and that's across small, medium, and large enterprises. And what we're trying to understand is what is it about the Java estates, what is it about the Java licensing that they find confusing? And no surprise here, much of what I already talked about, trying to track all the different kinds of licenses, making sure that they're compliant, making sure that the installations that they have are actually being used versus not being used, so you don't have to pay for it. Those things cause consternation amongst the IT asset managers who are basically on the hook for all of the costs associated with that licensing. But the number one thing that they complained about was budgeting, and that seems to be getting out of hand. Costs are rising because that new employee-based licensing model can increase your licensing costs by 2 to 10 times. And that's because the way that Oracle defines an employee is very loose. It includes contractors, it includes subcontractors, it may even include the janitor in your building. That can be a real consternation when you're trying to figure out, can I roll out this new project? Or even should I be, new hiring initiatives? How many people should I be hiring? Because that is directly going to affect your Oracle licensing costs. Those are things that people haven't thought of before that are now being impacted by it. And of course, once you start thinking about budgeting and the way that these budgets are being impacted, you start understanding, how can I minimize my costs? And now you're thinking about, rather than thinking about growth, you're thinking about cost cutting. And for many organizations, you really can't cost cut your way to growth. So you've got this trade-off that's kind of causing a consternation, and it's becoming a real problem with a lot of people that we talk to these days. For others, I talked a little bit about legacy technology. So like I said, most of the enterprises we talk to have quite a large Java estate, and that can go back many, many years. They're still running Java 6, they're still running Java 7, even though those platforms are no longer receiving any security fixes from Oracle. In some cases, that's a calculated risk, right? They've got it deployed on an internal LAN segment, only used internally. That helps. But in other cases, it's really just an appetite for risk because there are no security fixes coming for them. And I think that's a lot to do with the fact of awareness. A lot of organizations are more fixated on the new initiatives they have that are happening on newer versions of Oracle Java. And so that kind of stuff that's been running in the enterprise for 20, 25 years, the mantra is, if it's not broken, don't touch it. And so a lot of that awareness continues to be focused on the newer initiatives, not on the older ones. And that means you can be blindsided. For example, Java FX on Java 8. So Java 8, Oracle has recently announced that Java 8 will have Java FX pulled from the next release. That means the upcoming update in April will not feature Java FX. If you've been using JavaFX for your desktop GUIs, for example, one of the key use cases for JavaFX, or even if you have a server-side application that calls those JavaFX APIs, they may stop working. You're going to have a lot of errors in your CI/CD routine, and that can be leading to a lot of breakages amongst the organization. So suddenly those old applications that you were not broken, don't touch it, are going to start breaking. And so you're going to have some problems arising from the legacy technology in your organization as well. So can you upgrade your way out of these problems? Uh, let's look first at some of the license costs. So we know that Java is released every couple of years and the license gets swapped out every 3 years. So it's possible to get on a cadence where you just upgrade every 2 to 3 years and maintain yourself on that no fees terms and condition license that has no costs associated with it. That means you never have to pay Oracle a dime, and you can continue to use the Oracle Java without having to worry about the opportunity costs that may come with it. But there are other opportunity costs you need to be aware of. You're going to have to plan for those upgrades, and those upgrades are non-trivial. Let's look at how this looks like in reality. So you can see every couple of years, there's a new Java release these days. They've gotten a pretty good cadence. And that free enterprise license, that NFTC license, lasts for 3 years. So that gives you a 1 year window to plan to upgrade to the newest release. So upgrading once every 3 years, that doesn't seem too onerous, but there's a reason that enterprises continue to run Java applications, Java 8 applications, 11 years now after the GA. And that's primarily because there are some real costs associated with those upgrades. And that's what we want to talk about today is really the opportunity cost associated here. There's always a trade-off. When you're trying to upgrade your runtime, it's a non-trivial exercise. You've got to be prepared for this. There's some assessment, there's some planning up front, there's some environment setup, of course. Code-based refactoring, that can be a small or a very large component of that upgrade process. Something always changes between one version of Java and the next, depending on how much you've taken advantage of some class, for example, that may have gotten deprecated or refactored. You're going to have to be refactoring your code base, and that can be a big exercise. The biggest exercise tends to be just code-based testing, making sure that nothing is broken between versions. There may be some training and documentation that needs to be updated. And this is not a one and done thing, right? You want to be able to roll this out incrementally, understand, take one application, update it, understand everything associated with that so that you can repeat the process. Very few companies we're talking to have only one or two applications. It's more along the lines of dozens. So you'll have to do this incrementally over and over in order to be able to achieve your goal here. And at the end of the day, what is that goal? Well, because you haven't created any new code, you just updated your old code, maybe your applications run a little faster. And of course, you've avoided the licensing costs. But what could you have done with all the time and resources you spent on that upgrade? And I think this is where we want to talk about an example. So if you think about an ISV, an independent software vendor, somebody who has an application and they ship to JDK with that, what they need to think about is the Oracle license cost. They can either incorporate that cost into the price of their software, and that might make them less competitive in the marketplace, or they may just eat that cost, which can also impact your profitability. But let's think of the opportunity cost involved here, right? If I was going to try and upgrade my way out of that problem, I'm going to be spending time and resources doing all of those things that we have to do in order to make sure that I'm always in an upgrade cadence every 2 to 3 years. And what you're doing is you're spending all those times and resources on the upgrade to avoid the licensing costs, but at the same time, your competitors aren't. What they're doing is spending those time and resources creating new features, creating new functionality, and that means they're going to have an increased win rate. They're going to have grown their competitive gap with you. They're going to be able to have more features and functionality to sell to the customer. They're going to increase their win rate. They're going to increase their revenue. And that means they're going to grow their market share at your expense. So again, the lesson here is you really can't cost cut your way to growth. Now, let me turn it over to Simon and talk a little bit about doing support DIY. Simon?
Great, thank you. Yes, so what we're looking at here is this idea that you have free Java. So you've got free distributions of OpenJDK, and you think to yourself, okay, that's great. I don't have to pay for them. Therefore, there's no cost associated with them. But that's actually not really the case. And what we're talking about on this slide is the fact that the distribution might be free, but free doesn't necessarily come without a cost. Okay, well, if you're not paying for the distribution, what are you paying for? And this slide we'll talk about that. So the first thing that we need to look at is engineering cost. If you're doing your own support because nobody else is doing it for you, then you have to have somebody going to be doing that support. And that's going to cost you money. You've got to have people who are going to be dedicated to handling any issues that people have with Java inside your organization, and you have to pay those engineers. So that is one kind of easy cost that you can look at, is if you're doing your own support, who is actually doing that and what does it cost for those people. But there's more kind of indirect costs, which are, ones that you can't necessarily quantify so easily. You could say to yourself, right, I've got one engineer, I need to pay him a certain amount each year, so that's a fixed cost. But the kind of costs that you might not realize are the ones which are things like related to security and stability. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, this is all about unplanned downtime. If you're using a free version of Java, it will come with certain things and certain things will not be provided. So support is one of those, but even in terms of maintenance, the availability of updates, how long are you going to be waiting for updates after one is released? And that can be quite significant because when an update comes out, it contains a number of security patches and a number of bug fixes. Those security patches address vulnerabilities that have been identified in Java, and as soon as the update is published, those vulnerabilities become public, which means that the people who are the hackers can start attacking your systems based on what they know about these new vulnerabilities. If you're not able to patch those systems quickly, then you're exposed to those vulnerabilities. If the free version of Java that you're using, you have to wait days or even weeks before you get the update, those days and weeks are times when people can attack your systems. If somebody can attack your system, then there could be the possibility of a denial of service attack, or there could be the possibility of a breach, a remote code execution, data is extracted, all of those sort of nasty things. And you have to think to yourself, well, what's the cost of that if I do have a data breach? How much am I going to have to pay in terms of violations of necessary regulations, things like that? In terms of stability, if there's a problem with my application due to the JDK and I don't have support, how much am I going to have to deal with that internally? And how long am I going to have to wait before a bug fix becomes available? And again, this is a kind of combination of things around that security, because when an update comes out, it has a security patch, as I said, and it has changes which fix bugs. Now, if one of those changes actually impacts on something else, and we've seen this several times, so a bug fix actually introduces a new bug, then you could be stuck in a position where you can't apply the security patches, but you can't apply the update because it breaks your application. Without support, you don't have anybody to call, so you're in a very difficult situation where you're exposed to security vulnerabilities or you're not running your application. So that unplanned downtime could be very, very significant, and those data breaches could be very costly to you. Similarly, that unplanned downtime can lead to violations of your service level agreement with your customers. So if you guarantee to be able to provide a response within a certain time, that unplanned downtime can have a significant effect on you. Similarly, there are other costs that you need to think about. Engineering for support is one thing, as I said, but also if you're migrating your applications from using Oracle to using a free distribution, that takes some work, that takes some effort. Who's going to do that? How do you pay for it? And when you run into problems potentially with that, then how do you deal with those things? Now, when you're moving from one OpenJDK distribution to another, because we're building from the same source code, there really shouldn't be any issues on the server side. But on the desktop, we have desktop deployment technologies, as Dana's already kind of mentioned, things like JavaFX, WebStart, applets, all of those types of things. They can require a little bit more work in terms of that migration. If you've got nobody helping you on that, how long is it going to take? How much work is going to be involved for your personnel and so on? So migration is a big thing. End of life technologies, again, when Dana was talking about this, the whole JavaFX, applets, and WebStart kind of thing, plus JDK6 and JDK7. Now, those things are not sort of publicly supported anymore. When you've got JDK6 and 7 in use, if you're using a free distribution, there won't be any updates to that. So you need to look carefully about, if you can't move off JDK6 or JDK7, how do you then maintain the security and the stability of those things as well? Similarly, IP protection, this is around the idea of the licensing of the Java that you're using. Is there something you might be exposed to in terms of the GPL license there? So there are a lot of different things you need to think about very carefully when it comes to using a free distribution in terms of the costs you might be looking at in terms of using that free distribution. So if we can move to the next slide, please. What we did recently was to run a state of Java survey. We asked a lot of people questions about their usage of Java, which versions they were using, and which platforms, and so on. And one of the questions that came out of that was looking at people's attitude towards migrating away from Oracle. And as we can see from the slide here, the kind of breakdown of this is that most people were looking at migrating away from Oracle, 88% of companies. So the vast majority of people are looking at migrating away from that. Now, yes, there is a quarter of the people there were looking to migrate to a distribution without paid support. And I think that number is probably representative of people who haven't necessarily considered all of the implications that we did on the previous slide, where by using a free distribution, you think it comes without a cost, but at some point down the line, you're suddenly going to notice that, yes, it does come with an expense. But having said that, 46%, so nearly half, already made the decision to move to a supported version, and 17% are still looking at the options. So hopefully, people on the webinar will have helped to educate you on the aspects that you need to consider. And so you will think more carefully about using a supported version over a free version. And then if we move to the next slide, please. Yes, so what do we offer in terms of Azure? What alternative do we have? Well, clearly we're on an Azure webinar, so I feel happy in terms of talking about what we do. Our platform core product is about providing you with an identical, if not better, product than you get from Oracle in terms of the Java distribution. Now, when I say better, what I mean by that is we do still support JDK6 and JDK7. Oracle have stopped support for that. No other distribution provides support for that other than Azure. So that means you can still continue to use those very old versions of Java if you've got applications running on those that you don't want to move, or you're not in a position to move to newer versions of Java. Then you still have support for that in terms of updates, where you can get the security patches and the bug fixes that are being backported to those versions, maintaining the maximum level of security and the maximum level of stability for your applications on those old versions. But there's a lot more to it than that. Obviously, we have a lot of experience in terms of helping customers migrate from Oracle to OpenJDK. We've actually written a book about that. You can see on the background that I have and the background that Dana has, we have the OpenJDK migration for dummies. And what we've essentially done is take all that information and about different applications that we've worked with, different customers, and distill it down into a fairly small book. It's only about 60 pages, A5 format. It's not a huge tome. You can get through it pretty quickly, but it helps you to identify all the information you need and the process that you need to go through to do that migration. Another important aspect, and this is why I say we offer an identical product to Oracle, is that Oracle provide two versions of each update. There's what's called the CPU and PSU. CPU, or critical patch update, is only the security patches, and the PSU, or patch set update, is security patches plus everything else: bug fixes, performance improvements, any other changes. Why that's significant is that as I said, when you see bug fixes to certain things, sometimes there's a chance that changes can introduce a new regression, a new bug in the JDK. As I say, we've seen that a number of times in the past. What we've not seen is any of those issues affecting just the security only update, the CPU. So that means that if you have access to the CPU and the PSU, when an update is released and potentially there's a security vulnerability with a high score, maybe it's a critical vulnerability, you can use that CPU, deploy it very quickly with the minimal set of changes. It's normally somewhere in the region of like 2 to maybe a dozen changes, and then not have to worry about any issues that you could have with the PSU. If you don't have access to that CPU, that's when you can get into this unplanned downtime that could be unbounded, because if you can't get a fix to the problem, then you're not able to deploy that update. You're not able to deploy the security patches you need to address that critical vulnerability. So you're kind of stuck in a loop that you can't get out of. We can also provide out-of-cycle updates, which means that if you run into a problem that affects your application, and maybe it's one that only affects your application, not other ones, then we can do a root cause analysis of that. We can identify what the problem is and then produce a fix specifically for you as a customer. We can provide that to you to get your application up and running as quickly as possible. And then we will obviously upstream that change into OpenJDK so that we don't need to maintain a fork of the OpenJDK specifically for you as a customer. So all of those things are what we provide in terms of platform core. There are other things as well. So support for applets, support for Java Web Start. Those old end-of-life technologies, there are still lots of people using them. So in conjunction with JDK6, JDK7, 32-bit builds is another thing that we can provide for very old systems. So all these things are part of what we offer. And it's this idea that we can then ensure that you have the best possible set of technologies for the Java platform to enable you to run your applications, as I say, with the maximum level of security, maximum level of stability, but not having to deal with the Oracle pricing based on employee metric rather than based on the amount of Java you're actually using. So I think that's probably enough from me. I don't know, Dana, do we want to see if we've got some questions? If anybody does have any questions on what we've just talked about, then please do feel free to type those into the Q&A box, and we can certainly address those. So I can see one question we have here, which is, do we have to adopt the Java employee license model? Is it possible to stay on our existing license model? Well, obviously, I don't speak for Oracle, but what I can say is that Oracle have moved to this new employee-based metric. You have to count the number of employees, full-time, part-time, contractors, and any employees of external companies that manage your business applications that run on Java. So that could potentially be a very large number. The anecdotal evidence that I can tell you about, as I say, I don't work for Oracle, but having spoken to a number of customers, we have seen some customers who have managed to negotiate with Oracle to get a 1-year extension on their existing terms, but only if they haven't changed the amount of Java that they're using. If they've increased the amount of Java they're using, then they don't get the option to renew on those terms, but some customers have managed to renew for a year. They've also been told that they won't get another extension on that. So at the end of that year, they are going to then have to move over to the employee-based metric. Now, for those types of customers, that is actually a very good situation, because it means that they then have a year to assess, plan, and execute a migration to a different distribution of OpenJDK, so that they don't have to then deal with the increased price for the employee-based metric. So that, I think, is an answer to that question. Let's see, any other questions coming up here? Got one more question. What is Azul's pricing model? Yeah, okay, so we talked about Oracle's pricing model. What about Azul's pricing model? What we do there is we try to make it as simple as possible. So rather than the old Oracle way, which was to count the number of cores you have in your application systems and then multiply those core number by a certain multiplier, depending on what the architecture of the the processor was, and then adding all that up and then multiplying it by the number that Oracle gives you as the pricing per core, what we say is simply count the number of vCores that you have. So vCores is what you deal with in the cloud. So we treat vCores in the cloud as a single instance. If you're running in your data center, look at the number of cores, physical cores that you have in your machines. And then if you're having hyperthreading enabled, then in that case, we would double it. So effectively, you've got 2 threads of execution. So we treat that as 2 cores internally. But in the cloud, we just count number of vCores. So that way, it's a nice simple number. It's either the number of vCores in the cloud or the number of cores you have in your machines, doubled if you're using hyperthreading. What we then do is we say, well, we're not even going to bill you based on the exact number because we don't need to do that. So we have ranges of numbers. So like 0 to 500 vCores is one price, 500 to 1,000 vCores is another price, and so on. And we rapidly get to what's called our unlimited offering, which is where you don't even have to bother counting. You just say, okay, we have so many vCores, then we don't need to bother about that. We'll just go with the unlimited pricing. On the desktop, again, simplified so that you don't have to worry about things like Oracle's named user plus, which meant that you counted the number of people who shared machines as well as the machines. In our case, we simply count the number of desktops or laptops that you're running on. And again, we use the bands so that you have 0 to 500, 500 to 1,000, and so on. So it is designed to be as simple as possible. We don't do auditing of our customers. So it's based on, we do agree a price, agree a number, and then that's the number and the price for the entire length of the contract. So yeah, I think, Dana, do you have any closing thoughts? Because I don't see any more questions.
I think we're at the end here. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And we have our next webinar in the series coming up in just a few weeks. Please join us again on April 23rd when we'll be talking about the real TCO of free Java. Until then, signing off. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.